So here we are continuing to work through the review topics for both Math 038, Math 052, and Math 053. For Math 038, this covers sections R14 and R15, as well as a little more practice on long division comes up incidentally. And for Math 052, 053, this is the remainder of section 2.3 that we haven't yet done. And down there, I've also made note of some overlap with some Math 025, 026 topics, because this is technically review material. So what we're going to do this first lesson here today is we are going to focus just on converting back and forth between fractions, decimals, and percents. That means being able to take any one of these three and turn it into one of the other ones. Some of these are really easy and some of them get a little more complicated. So for example, just reminding ourselves that all three of these things are really the same. Percents, fractions, and decimals are all the same thing, because 75%, that percent means per hundred, because cent is Latin for 100. So as a fraction, as a fraction, 75 per 100. That's literally the translation from a percent to a fraction. And of course, we always reduce. So you might notice that 25 goes into both 75 and 100. So we divide top and bottom by 25. And that gives us 3 over 4. And then if we want to go to a decimal, we're going to remind ourselves that how we wrote this over here, 75 over 100, we literally read that decimal out as 75 hundredths. And we write the decimal 75 hundredths as 0.75, because remember, the tenths is the first one and the hundredths is the second. So if you go to the second decimal, it is hundredths. So there is just a reminder of how these three things are all the same. And what we're going to do is try and figure out the fastest way to go from any one of these to any one of the others. So first of all, a percent to a fraction. So let's just remind ourselves of what we just did. 75% means 75 per 100, and then we reduce that fraction by dividing out of the top and the bottom to 3/4. So in other words, we put the percent over 100 and then we simplify the fraction. So that's our strategy for that first one. And then we're going to try a few here. So why don't you just take maybe 30 seconds, and why don't you try maybe just taking the first step on each of those. And then if you're able to also do some reducing, you can. What we're going to find as we get to those ones on the right there is that there's a few more steps involved. But why don't you try on your own, taking a few, beginning these questions here. Okay, on that first one, 80% means 80. No, there they all are actually. 80 per 100, 145 over 100, 32.6 over 100, 15.197 over 100. First one's fairly straightforward. We can divide top and bottom by, well, we're going to do it by 10 there first. That's the obvious one we see. It gets us 8 out of 10, but then you realize those are both still even, so we can reduce another step by dividing them both by 2. And we get down to 4/5 as that reduced fraction. On the next one, also not too bad, 145 over 100. You can see that when the percent is over 100, the top is bigger than the bottom because we have more than the whole, is what 145% would mean. I would notice that those are both divisible by 5. You might have to go do a little bit of long division to get the 145 divided by 5. You're going to get 29 on that. So 29 over 20, or that could be converted to a mixed fraction. We're going to leave it as 29 over 20 for now. This one here, 32.6 over 100. So that decimal does not work. When we say go to a fraction, we do not mean a fraction that has a decimal in it. Are we going to make that go away? Well, if we multiply top and bottom by 10, which we know we're allowed to do, what that will do is it'll turn that decimal into 326, and the bottom will be 1,000. And then we see that the top and bottom can both be divided by 2, giving us 163 over 500. You try and find any more reducing. I don't think that one is going to reduce any further than that. So there's our fraction answer. So when you have a decimal in a percent and you're going to a fraction, you have to multiply top and bottom until you don't have a decimal anymore. So we're going to see the same exact thing here. I have 3 decimal places, so I'm going to need to multiply by a 1 with 3 zeros, 1,000, because that will move those decimal places on the top over 1, 2, 3. And I do the same thing on the bottom, which adds a bunch of zeros. So we make the decimals go away, and I don't think this one reduces any further. I didn't want to make this too nasty, but if it did, you would break that down. The nice thing about 100,000, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000, and so on, is that the only things that go into it are 5 and 2. So it's usually pretty obvious if it reduces, right? It either has to be even or end in a 5 or 0. Okay, so there is our first option. When we want to go from a percent to a fraction, we press the percent over 100 and we simplify. Percent to a decimal. Let's remind ourselves what we did back on that first example. We said 75% is 75 over 100, and then that is 75 hundredths, which is literally how we say this decimal, 0.75. You don't need to go through all those steps though, because look, if you just look at the 75% and the 0.75, you realize you could have skipped the middle step entirely. All that's happening is this decimal place went over 2, right? So 75, if we don't write the decimal, we know that it's right there at the end. So 75 dot is how you could think of 75. So you take the decimal over 2 to the left, and it becomes 0.75. So the decimal goes 2 to the left is how we get from a percent to a decimal. And when we go decimal to a percent, we realize that we can just reverse that. So these are the easiest two by far, going from a percent to a decimal or a decimal to percent. So when we go from a decimal to a percent, we just take the decimal 2 to the right. 0.75 becomes 75%. So there's our next two rules. Let's try a few quickly here. So let's work our way down here. 62%, I'm just going to go 1, 2 to the left. That becomes 0.62. 185, so our decimal is there at the end. 1, 2 to the left becomes 1.85. 52.6%, 1, 2 to the left becomes 0.526. And 0.3%, 1, 2 to the left, so we're going to have to add an extra 0 in there. 1, 2, 0.003 is what that will become. 0.3%, 0.003. Okay. Over here, turning these decimals into percents, we're going to go in the reverse order. 1, 2 to the right, 92%. 1, 2 to the right, 122%. Here we go, 0.2594, 1, 2 to the right will become 25.94%. And here, 1, 2 to the right will become 0.06%. 0.0006 as a decimal is 0.06%. So like I said, that's the easiest ones there. The percents and decimals back and forth, you're just simply moving the decimal place 2 to the left or 2 to the right. A really common mistake, just to draw attention to it here, a lot of people will see this question and just instinctively, without thinking it through, will write we'll write 0.3. But remember that 0.3, move that decimal 2 to the right, would actually be 30%, right? Not 3%. So 3% as a decimal is 0.03. All right, Decimal to a fraction is next. So let's remind ourselves again of what we did. This is what we did actually on our very first review lesson we did on that when we first started doing these in the second week. And what we did on these is we just look at how many decimal places there are, and that tells us whether to go over 10 or 100 or 1,000. So if there's one decimal place, 0.3 is 3 over 10. Two decimal places going to the hundredths is 75 over 100. Three decimal places going to the thousandths is 526 over 1,000, and so on. And then you would have to reduce whatever you get there as your fraction answer. So putting that in words, for decimal to a fraction, we put the number over the appropriate power of 10, depending on how many decimal places there are, and then we reduce. So I think we'll try a few of these. Again, why don't you just take 30 seconds and try the first step, then we'll do the reducing together. So decide whether these should go over 10, 100, or 1,000. 0.7 has one decimal place, so it's 7 over 10. 5.35 has two decimal places, so it's 35 over 100. So this is 5 and 35 hundredths. Now, you could, if you like it better, you could also call that 535 over 100. That would also be the same thing. But I think 5 and 35 hundredths is a little easier. The reducing is easier as well. So we have 5 and 2 decimal places, 35 hundredths. Let's reduce that. Top and bottom both divide by 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. And 100 divided by 5 is 20, and those are all on your times table sheet, right? So again, have that times table sheet handy until you're at the point in the course where you can use a calculator. 0.128, 3 decimal places, means we put it over I also converted that to brain just stopped working. Improper fraction. There we go. All right, up here, 0.128, 3 decimal places. 128 over 1,000. We're going to reduce that. Divide top and bottom by 2. 64 over 500. Oh, they're both still even. Divide by 2 again. 32 over 250. Oh, they're both still even. Divide by 2 again. 16 over 125, and there we go. That won't reduce any further. Now, if you had noticed in the very first step, if you had noticed up here that 128 and 1,000 are both divisible by 8, then you could have done that reduction in one single step. But I tend to find that by the time I figure out that they're both divisible by 8, I could have just divided them both by 2, 3 times. So every once in a while, you might find a reduction, that you do quicker, but my tendency is just to like to start reduce. Does it divide by 2? Does it divide by 3? Does it divide by 10, 5? Right? Just break it down as quickly as I can. That's my preference anyways. Okay, so we have done all of these options. We have a strategy for each of these things. I'll leave this screen up at some point later on as well if you want to copy things down. The final two are going to involve a little bit of long division, at least again until you're at a part in the course where you can have a calculator in your hand. But it is important to know these basic skills. So going from a fraction to a decimal or a fraction to a percent. Going back, reminder of our first example we did, 3/4 is 0.75. How the heck are you going to do that? How do you come up, if I give you the 3/4, how do you come up with 0.75? Other than maybe, because 3/4 is a nice fraction, we're familiar with 75 cents, right? If it wasn't nice numbers like that. So how do we get from the fraction to the decimal? And the trick here is to remember that fractions are really just another way to write division. So 3 over 4 is actually 3 divided by 4. So to do this one, we are actually going to do long division, the top divided by the bottom. It's very tempting to reverse those because we're so used to dividing the bigger number by the smaller number. But let's look at this. 3 over 4 actually means 3 divided by 4. And if we write that in long division, the 3 goes under the division sign and the 4 goes out front like that. Not 4 divided by 3, but 3 divided by 4. Now, right away, you say, how many 4s go into 3? Oh, I can't do it. I'm going to need to add a decimal point after the 3 and some zeros. I'm going to start with 2 zeros. That's going to turn out to be enough for this. So 3 is the same as 3.00. Now I can follow my long division steps, and I notice I lined up my decimal there, as we learned to do in our long division day. So 4 goes into 30. Look at your times table. How many 4s fit into 30? 4 times 7, you'll see, is 28. So 7 4s go into 30 up there. Multiply back. 7 times 4 is 28. Subtract. 30 minus 28 is 2. Bring down the next 0. And repeat the process. How many 4s can you fit into 20? Well, 4 times 5 is exactly 20. So 5. Multiply back. 5 times 4 is 20. And subtract, and you get 0. And that tells you that you're done. There's no point in going any further. So there we have the process. And you can see this is easily the worst one of all, of going from a fraction to the decimal, a little bit of long division to get our answer, 0.75. Let's try another one. So 2 over 7 means 2 divided by 7. And there is the long division. And maybe I'd recommend just copy out that answer, and you can try that long division on your own later if you want to confirm. But how many 7s go into 20? 7 times 2 is 14, so 2 7s fit into 20. 2 times 7 is 14. Subtract, you get 6. Bring down the next 0. How many 7s fit into 60? 7 times 8 is 56. So 8. 8 times 7 is 56. Subtract, you get 4. Bring down the next 0 and repeat. So this is just going to keep on going, it looks like. I'm not sure exactly what that decimal ends up being after that. I'm going to stop there, 2.28571. And so maybe the question says give your answer to 3 decimal places. If it is, so I'm going to round to 3 decimal places, meaning I'm looking at that 5. That's either going to stay a 5 or go up to a 6. I make the decision by looking at the next digit. So 0.286. Or maybe they said put your answer to 4 decimal places, 0.2857. So that 7 is either going to stay a 7 or go up to 8. I make the decision by looking at the next digit. It's only a 1, so that stays a 7. So there would be our answer to 4 decimal places. Okay. Only 1 to go, and we basically already know how to do the last one. So long division gets us from a fraction to a decimal. If we want to go from a fraction to a percent, it's the same process. We're going to do the long division, and then remember the percent to the decimal, we just move the decimal 2 to the left. So we're going to combine those two. We're going to do long division, and then just pop the decimal places, place 2 to the right to make it a percent. So let's just do one of those quickly. In fact, we're going to do the same 2 we just did. 3/4, we already did the long division and discovered that it's 0.75. Move the decimal 2 places to the right, makes it 75%. 2/7 as a percent. Do the long division, and we get 0.28571. Which is 28.571%. So you see it's the same process we just did, then just move the decimal 2 over to make it a percent. And oh yeah, so and then I said here, or if maybe they just wanted the nearest whole percent, for example, then you would round that to 29% in this case. Back to our chart, there's the whole deal. That's something worth screenshotting possibly if you want to. Or if you want me to send you that separately, I can do that as well. And what I'm going to suggest now, we finished that lesson right on time. Good. Is there's a little chart with a bunch of options, and I'd suggest that as we take a little pause here and I answer questions from anybody who has them, that you might want to just take a shot at completing that chart. So turn 44% into a fraction and a decimal, turn 0.85 into a fraction and a percent, turn 2/5 into a percent and a decimal, and so on.